la conciliació a vegades no és tan fàcil com la política és tan absorbent per la teva parella que
Joan, els teus serveis requereixen una planta 3.
És molt amiga de l'Aamer.
Doncs això, doncs el que deia és, bueno, estic satisfeta, estic encantada, primer, un home, un amic, un filòsof, un professor, una persona jove.
Cada dia menys.
Bueno, doncs hagi pres aquesta decisió de fer un pas endavant i fer política. I fer política d'una manera d'entendre, com penso que molts de nosaltres doncs també l'entenem i estem convençuts que una manera diferent de fer política és possible. I juntament amb ell, un gran equip de gent, l'Eulàlia que està sentada davant, la Diana, i tot un equip tècnic, etc., doncs tirem endavant un projecte que evidentment serà exitós. I d'alguna manera, primàries, perquè no és més que el resultat d'aquests valors que alguns partits tant en parlen, però que sembla que sempre els tenen en guanyantet, esperar guanyar per fer aplicar els valors de la participació, de la transparència, doncs no. Jordi tenia clar que si entrava en la política ho havia de fer d'una manera específica i ha estat en primàries, la qual cosa ja diu molt de quina és el seu posicionament o com entén aquesta política. I de fet, està aquí avui com a alcaldable gràcies a un mecanisme que ha estat el més participat de la història de Barcelona, les primàries més participants. En fi, res que ja no sapigueu, però que m'agrada explicar-ho perquè això és el que fa que també hi hagi molta gent independent, que estiguem donant suport i que les primàries no deixen de ser també la suma de moltes trajectòries. I això em permet encadenar-ho, perquè també tenim la sort de tenir amb nosaltres a l'Aamer Anwar, aquest advocat prestigiós al Regne Unit, de fet a tot el món, perquè té clients a tot el món, però que al Regne Unit constantment, ja porta no sé quants anys seguits que li donen premis al millor sol·lícitor, al millor advocat, doncs tenir la sort que doni suport de manera explícita a les primàries i de manera molt explícita a la llista que encapçala el Jordi Graupera i que tanca la consellera que ha aconseguit en aquestes municipals per l'Ajuntament de Barcelona. És aquesta suma de trajectòries que deia i que mi mateixa com a portaveu d'una organització que s'ha oposat, que veiem l'autodeterminació, que va donar la possibilitat de conèixer i que evidentment quan es demoga res a Europa conèixer el projecte de les primàries impulsat per Jordi Graupera aquí a Catalunya, doncs la veritat és que tothom està encantat de donar-li suport. I en el cas de l'Aamer, que és una persona que entén, i ho dic molt clarament perquè és així, tota la seva vida ha estat així, que entén la política en majúscules, doncs una persona que, evidentment, sense cap benefici personal, té el suficient sentit polític per donar suport a quelcom com les primàries i la candidatura del Jordi simplement perquè pensa que és allò correcte a fer. Per tant, presentats tots dos, tindrem una conversa de fet en anglès que jo voldria una mica que se centrés en aquest tema tan important i tan fonamental, tan excepcional per nosaltres com és l'autodeterminació. Una autodeterminació que a vegades és molt abstracta, però que alhora és tan concreta. I que millor que parlem dels dos, precisament perquè en Jordi Graupera es guanya la vida estudiant i treballant l'autodeterminació i en Aamer Anwar perquè a part de ser advocat, la veritat és que aquesta passió també li ve que és un activista de tota la vida que dona suport evidentment a l'autodeterminació i l'entén com aquest apoderament ciutadà que tots els pobles necessitem. Per tant, so I just made a little bit of an introduction. Try to be short, but you guys, so I want to talk about this. And basically, I would like to start saying that not long ago, I said we participated in the writing a book with the president of the Veneto Parliament, that it was precisely why we think that self-determination is a good mechanism, is a good tool to block a globalization that looks like it wants to uniform all cultures. Globalization as a phenomenon that makes all the local cultures to look the same, to be the same. So, and somehow, you go around the globe and you know very much the international scenario, which is what self-determination can give us to stop this kind of uniformization that globalization tries to implement worldwide.
Well, I think thank you for the introduction. And it's an honor to be here. It's an honor to support Jordi and all the candidates in primary Catalonia. With regards to the question you ask, I think in all the independence struggles that you've looked at over the years, over the last 2-3 centuries, wherever a country has struggled for freedom, wherever it's struggled for independence, it normally has been because that country has had its assets stolen from it, it's been subject to rule from abroad or from next door. To simplify it, I think probably the way we dealt with it in Scotland was we said to somebody that if somebody came into your house, a house that you've loved, you've built up over the years, your children grow up in it, your parents had you as children, and then you have your children, and you've lived in there all your life and you live in that neighborhood. And then somebody walks in one day into that neighborhood and takes control of your house and says, don't put the dishes there, don't switch the washing machine on like that. Hang your clothes up like this. You have to go to sleep at 9 o'clock. We will turn the electricity off. We will turn you when the water comes on. Eventually, in the first day, they could say to you, listen, we'll give you lots of money. We'll give you 10,000 euros a day. In the beginning, you might be happy with it. In the second day, you might be happy with it. But by the third day, you get fed up because you feel as though somebody is controlling the way you live. And that, for me, is a simple way of describing why people struggle for independence. Because unless you can control your own financial needs, unless you can control the way you live your life, the way you, in terms of climate change, which is a big issue at the moment in Scotland and a big issue here and all around the world, how you utilize your resources, unless you can control that, then if somebody else is in charge of it, then you can't make a difference. And invariably, and in all these occasions, whether it be the United Kingdom, whether it be England, whether it be other countries, or whether it be Spain, they always want to benefit themselves. So it's always about benefiting themselves and using you as a cheap option and taking control of your resources and taking more out than actually they put in. So I think that's the simple way of looking at why people want independence and what difference it can make. And now for me, I think there is a big argument to be had because in Scotland, with the SNP, there is major arguments taking place because it's a huge organisation after we lost the independence referendum in 2014. Something like about 120,000 people joined the SNP. And before, in the SNP, you probably couldn't even fill this room. Now when we have a conference, we have to find a venue that is probably about 20 times the size of this. We have, when Clara Ponsati spoke last year with me at the SNP conference, we had 3,500 people in the room. But there is a split because you have people from the right, you have people from the left, you have people in the centre. But for me, what independence means, and people ask me why did I want independence in Scotland, and I believe the same, and I said so earlier on today, is a case of, acting as a block against austerity. Social justice, human rights, equality, all these issues have to be at the heart of a struggle for independence to actually convince people that life can be different. And yes, of course, people say, oh, well, it'll be difficult in the beginning because the financial capital will flee and the corporations and the companies will take their head offices. You know what? At the end of the day, if they do, they do. Life goes on. I do not know a single country in the world that has struggled and won independence, that has given blood for independence, that fought for hundreds of years, if not thousands of years, to be free, that once they've won independence, no matter how bad things are, they've never said turn the clock back to being under the control of someone else. So even if you look at my parents come from Pakistan. Pakistan has had so many troubles. I don't know a single Pakistani that says turn the clock back to be ruled by the British. The same for India. It's the same for every single African country that's been controlled by the French, by the Spanish, by the Portuguese, by the British. Not a single country, despite all the troubles, ever says we want to go back to being ruled by somebody else. So I think that is the best. That is the destiny for.
Bless you.
That's I believe, the destiny for Catalonia in terms of globalization. I think it's very important because unless you control your own house, then you can't fight globalization. You can't make things better for your own community. And I also think it radicalizes people. This struggle will have brought people, so many people from different walks of life together. Whether it was the millions of people who came out in the streets, who voted on October the 1st, whether it's 1.5 million in the Diada, whether it's the millions who come out in the streets again and again. Even when I was walking down through the streets and people coming up and saying, wanting to speak and get selfies and speak and, and say gracias, etc. But you can realize that you're seeing different people from different walks of life. And that's my best memory of the Diada last year, was the 1.5 million people. But people from every sector of life was represented, and that's the beauty of this country, that you have such tremendous resources, such amazing people, culture, music, language, that of course Catalonia can be free, but Catalonia can also be a successful country that can take its place amongst the nations. And no, it doesn't have to be, people sometimes in England say, oh, we're number one on the planet, we're one of the greatest nations. I don't want to be one of the greatest nations on the world. I don't want to be like America says, or like Britain says, or like maybe Spain says. I just want to be an equal partner. That's all I want. I want my children to be brought up in a society that judges them not because of the color of their skin, not because of their religion, but because of who they are, because of what they do, and how they justify their existence is not because of their religion, because of the color of skin or how much they earn, but because they are valued. And I think that's the society that we want in Scotland, and I think that's what people want in Catalonia. People often say to me, and I'll finish off, the answer's a long answer, but I'll finish off by saying that people often in Scotland say to me, oh, you're supporting the nationalists, you're supporting the separatists. I'm saying, how come Spain is not called nationalists? How come Spain is not called the ultra-nationalists or the unionists? They are unionists, but they're not called nationalists. They can fly the Spanish flag on, but Catalonia, the insult is thrown is they're nationalists, they're separatists, they're racists. And the same argument is thrown against the people in Scotland, against the SNP and those who struggle for independence. For me, whether it's in Scotland, we see our unity still exists with the working class and the poor and the vulnerable in England, in London, in Manchester, in Liverpool, and I think the same applies within Catalonia. There is so much not to divide, but actually to build a bridge with people in Spain. The sad part, I think, is that people in Spain have a media and a political parties that do not have the guts to speak the truth, and are actually not told actually what's happened to Catalonia, the history of what goes on, but have branded the Catalan struggle as being nationalistic, as being separatist, etc. And believe me, if I believed that the Catalan movement was racist or separatist or nationalistic, I would have nothing to do it, because I'm an internationalist. I'm not a nationalist, I'm an internationalist, but I believe Catalonia should be free.
And now I have to say something, no? After all this. First of all, Marina, series tan amable de tancar la porta al carrer perquè quan passen els cotxes interfereix amb el so? Gràcies. Thank you, Aamer, for being here. Thank you for all the work you've been doing with us, the Catalan people, over the last years. Sometimes we are thirsty for this kind of recognition. Sometimes this means that we are maybe more small-minded than we would like, because we need recognition from outside, somebody telling us, I'm an internationalist, I'm a lawyer, I'm a rector, and I recognize that your fight is worthwhile. And And sadly, we need this. We do. So everything you've been doing, you've changed many people's minds. You've been able to show to us an example of how to respond to repression, how to respond to the acts of Spanish politicians in a way that it's never small. It's never giving in to the bullying tactics of them. So thank you. I wanted to say this. I'm going to take advantage to the fact that we are discussing self-determination in a very abstract way to put on my academic hat and say a couple of things that I think are interesting in, around the idea of self-determination. When I started to work on self-determination a couple of years ago, and I went to Princeton to an institute that studies self-determination and only self-determination, there was a question that our boss asked us, and he said, we need to be able to answer this question to understand what we are doing. And the question was, why is self-determination coming back? Why is there a renaissance of self-determination around the world? Why this right that at some point in history, or several points in history, was very important and prevalent, then suddenly disappeared for some years, and then now seems to be back, and seems to be back in a different way. It was in Yugoslavia, for example, or in former Russian republics. And it came violently, and it came with war, and it came with ethnic cleansing, and it came with all these things that we've seen on TV many times and affected us. And then there seems to be a second wave, a wave that is peaceful, that is democratic, that is rooted in human rights or an internationalist perspective. Why is this happening? There's no easy answer to this question, but I'm going to try and give you some ideas that I think may be interesting to reflect upon. First of all, I would say that there's something broken within the liberal system. There's something broken. People who are liberals, not in the sense of Esperanza Aguirre, but in the sense of liberal democracy, in the sense of believing in democracy and equality and freedom and human rights and all those things, seem to be uncomfortable in how the system is being used in several countries. But what is exactly wrong with that? I think it has something to do with the time that has passed since Second World War. After Second World War, there was a wave of democratization in the West, of even social rights and welfare state, decolonization. There was several aspects that had to do with being more democratic, more liberal in that sense, except for one. No country allowed itself to recognize that the actual borders of the countries were the product of violence and fear. Maybe not the violence and fear of Second World War, maybe it was a previous violence or a previous kind of fear, but it was there. And the only reason why the peoples that lived in these small nations or smaller nations within the countries that we all had accepted as the countries that had to be and there was no other option, the only reason why they were not demanding explicitly or with determination their freedom was because fear was still there. Fear was part of the reason why they were not demanding self-determination in the way what we're doing now. This silence, this fear, this memory of violence and repression made us feel sometimes small, disconnected from history, disconnected from the national narrative of the states we belong to. And the idea that we could not aspire to that kind of freedom became common currency. It was common sense not to want independence. We've lived this in Catalonia for years, especially the last 40 years, were the years in which our own politicians, our own parties, devoted a lot of time to telling us that we did not have the right to independence or to real self-determination. It is telling that the 11 times that the Catalan parliament approved the idea that Catalans had the right to self-determination was not a positive statement. It was not, we have the right to self-determination, but the formulation was, we do not renounce the right to self-determination, just telling the psychology that was behind all these parliamentary resolutions. But then at some point, I think, two things happened. First, after the fall of the Berlin Wall and after the violent processes of independence of very small nations against big countries like Russia and Estonia, Lithuania, or what's the third one? Latvia. There was some sense that, and also the emergence of the European Union, that the states believed that would cancel all national struggles because, we were creating this super state in Europe. The mechanism, the idea that peace was the main historical quality of our time, freed us from that fear. It gave us permission to believe that self-determination was possible. It gave us permission to think that all these conversations that we all had at home, maybe on a Sunday after lunch with the Turtel, those conversations in which we all said, if independence was a matter of pushing a button, then we would push that button. But if we do, Spain will send us tanks and will send us all those things that were common, in our conversations. Suddenly this idea was broken because we could all see that in today's world, the usual tactics against Catalan self-government could no longer be used, meaning bombing Barcelona. This was like the main tactic against self-government, right? Bombing Barcelona. This was no longer possible. And suddenly, I think this happened everywhere in the West. The idea that you could take matters into your own hands and the response could no longer be the kind of violence that we had seen previously. That's the first thing that I think changed. Second, the idea that reform was not possible. Reform of these states to make them more decentralized or more, federal or confederal or, however we want to call it, was not possible. Because it seems like they were willing, the elites that were governing these countries, they were willing to be democratic as long as we were not ready to contest their monopoly over power. That we were not ready to point out that the judiciary in Spain or the diplomacy in Spain or the deep state in Spain was still controlled by the same families and the same people that had control it during the dictatorship. And of course, you can find parallels in every country with their own history, but still, like the idea that reform had a limit, and then that limit was not questioning the national supremacy of some people over a minority or over a smaller group of people. And then a third thing that it's a little more complicated. I don't have a clear idea on my mind either, but I'm going to try and explain it. It's the distinction between thick and thin. There's a philosopher, Walzer, is called, has a very thin book called Thick and Thin, that makes the following argument that I think it's important. Since the end of the Second World War until maybe 2001, to say something, the main idea within political philosophy and political science and media, intellectuals, culture, was that we all, the entire humanity, we all share some minimal values, thin values. Values about human rights or about rationality, or about democracy, or about equality, or about freedom, or about dignity. And the argument says that apparently we all have that since we are born. It's something natural in us, something that is part of our essence as human beings: dignity, freedom, democracy. And then that cultures, religions, languages, cultural differences, that these things obscure these values that we all have. So that for us to be able to have a global system that is just and dignified and free and equal, we need to be able to overcome our cultures, our languages, our religions, all the things that make us either one type of people or another type of people. That gave them permission to accept that sometimes states and policies make peoples disappear, make languages disappear, make religions disappear. Because of course, this is how progress works, right? We are, overcoming our small cultures to become universal, to become global, to become just and free and equal and all that. This has been the main argument for 40 or 50 years in the West. Now, Walzer claims that this is all wrong, that we don't have an essence, like a spiritual or metaphysical essence that is linked to democracy or dignity or liberty or equality just because we are humans. But it's the other way around. We become aware that freedom is important, that democracy is important, that human rights are important, that dignity is important, that equality is important, because we are thrown into a culture. We are born into a culture, and it's the way our parents talk to us, it's the way our parents teach us through religion or through culture or through ethics or through whatever, socialization, that all these things are important. And the reason why we become able to recognize the other as an equal, someone from another culture, someone from another religion, someone from another race, someone from another blah, 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 is because from our own rooted culture, we are able to recognize the subtle, sophisticated, precious richness of the plurality of the world. And if we have a system that promotes the destruction of all these roots, if we have a system that promotes the disappearance of languages or the disappearance of religions or the disappearance of cultures, then we become unprotected. We become unable to find these ideas of dignity and freedom and democracy as meaningful ideas for us, and then we become unable to recognize the other. We become more isolated, we become more lonely, we become more, fragile in the face of great powers or elites or oligarchs or people who are ready to oppress us at every minute. So Walzer tells us that the uncomfortability that some people in the West have been feeling for the last years against these fake liberal systems has to do with this, that sometimes these elites seem very adamant, very eager to destroy the cultures that are not their culture, the religions that are not their religion, the languages that are not their language, with the argument that this is universal. We've experienced this in Barcelona, in Catalonia, many times. For decades, the socialist government in Barcelona, or the socialist government in Madrid, or even when Aznar, of all people, was quoting Habermas to say that his patriotism was constitutional patriotism. That we've been told that in order to be cosmopolitan, in order to be universal, in order to be an internationalist, we had to be ready to renounce our language, to renounce our culture, to renounce our... And I think the revolt of the Catalans is a revolt that shows that all these ideas were wrong, that the reason why we are internationalists is because we believe that we have something to say in the conversation of the world as equal partners with others. The reason why we can recognize the struggle of many people in Barcelona that arrive, in a very precarious situation, immigrants or working class people, we are able to recognize the dignity and the need to protect this precisely because we are Catalans. There's no other way to, access these truths unless we recognize our own truths. And I'm going to finish with an anecdote. There's a French philosopher that I love called Paul Ricoeur. He died 2003, maybe. He was a very well-known French socialist and Christian, both. And when he was very old, there was a young journalist who asked him, are you aware that if you were Chinese, you would not have been Christian? And his answer was, I don't know who you're talking about. There's no possibility of imagining yourself as being another. You are who you are, and that's why you can recognize the other as an equal, because you recognize yourself. So these three ideas, I think, in part, maybe not very well, but explain why self-determination is somehow coming back to our life as a right that encompasses all other rights, all other dignities, and all other freedoms.
Well, then let me move from this abstract starting from self-determination to actually to the last point you were making. That is, would be interesting to know how do you think self-determination can be applied from the city halls? What is the power, what is the room to actually take self-determination from an abstract level to apply it to the everyday life of people? What is the connection with the cities, with the life of the people? Because politics, they love to say, well, and actually maybe it's one of the things that they like to repeat it, and maybe we agree, when they say that actually the city halls and the governments of the municipalities are the closest governments to the people. That is true. But then what is the margin for the aspiration of people? Is this dictated as well from these governments? So self-determination from the institutions in a local basis. Do we have any room, even though we are not independent yet?
Yeah, I think the phrase that comes to mind is the word power of the people. And whether it be elections in Scotland, whether it be elections in England, or whether it be elections in Catalonia or Spain, all politicians, the establishment parties are guilty of using the words power of the people. But what I've learned over the years, what I've learned recently in the last 2 years or so with Catalonia, is that they don't actually mean it. What they mean is vote for us, every few years come along, put a tick in the box or a cross in the box, and then go away. And we know better. We will run the country for you. And that to me isn't democracy. Because when people, somebody earlier on today when we were in Place de Sant, was asking me about people not being involved in democracy anymore, young people not wanting to get involved in talking about direct democracy. And I said, look, as far as I'm concerned, young people, middle-aged people, old people are interested in democracy, are interested in the society. What they're not interested in is politicians that are liars. Politicians that only want your vote, want the money that goes with it, want the power that goes with it, want the seat that goes with it, want the trappings and the luxury that goes with it, but actually in reality want nothing to do with the people apart from when they need to use them as cannon fodder. So that's the first thing to analyze. So how do you change that? Well, whether it be in Scotland or whether it be in Catalonia or whether it be in England, and I keep going backwards and forwards because there's a lot of similarities, although there's a huge difference. Sometimes I get annoyed with people in Scotland when they say, oh, what the Catalans is happening to the Catalans is the same as what happened to Scottish. And I say, no, it's not. We didn't have Franco. We don't have thousands of people in unmarked graves. We didn't have the firing squads. We didn't have that. We might have done hundreds of years ago, but we don't have that now, so it's completely different. But whether it be Scotland, England, or whether it be in Catalonia, I think, and even in Spain, is that the power of those establishment parties comes from the local municipalities. Because if they control the cities, if they control the towns, if they control the villages, then they use that as the mechanism, as in sort of a mini armies, to basically give them power at the top. Because they don't just reach the top by being on their own. They have to have layers and networks all across the cities and the towns and the villages. And they use that in order to retain their power. But what they do is, many of the parties are, Labour, for instance, in the United Kingdom is guilty of this. For many years, it was seen as a party that fought for the oppressed, the tribune of the oppressed, for the weak, the vulnerable in society, fought for human rights, equality, fought for the working class, did tremendous things, bought in the National Health Service, fought for a free education. But then as it got lazier and lazier, because it's inevitable, once you're in power, and 1 year goes by, 2 years go by, 5 years go by, 10 years go by, 20, 30, you get used to power. You become corrupted by power. And then that means that you want to hold on to it. And then eventually people start to turn around, they're just the same as the other. They're just the same. And that you can't tell the difference between the two sides. And I think within the municipalities, I think the issue is if you want to change society, if you truly want independence, then you have to start from the bottom. Not from the top, but from the bottom. Because they won't let go at the top. They're gonna hold on to their dying breath at the top. They will not let go. So it has to start from the bottom. And I think to start from the bottom, it means in cities like Barcelona and the towns and the villages and the cities, starting to take control of those institutions and starting to implement accountability, transparency, control of resources, and say, no, when we say we're going to build houses, we'll build houses. When we say we're going to repair the water systems or the electricity or whatever it is, we will actually do it. We won't do it just before an election's about to happen, but actually we will use the money and the resources. And when we say that actually we're going to spend the money on the people, not on ourselves, we will prove it. We will be transparent. We will show our accounts. We will not jet set around the world and have big dinners ourselves while people are homeless on the streets. We won't say we'll clean the streets up for the tourist by hosing down, the homeless and the people who have no money, but actually, no, we will use the resources for those people. Now, with that, I think that if you, which I think you will be successful, I think the door will open, as in, I don't know how many seats you will get, but you most definitely will be successful, and that will be an earthquake for the establishment, because they're clever, because they won't just be looking at, it's May the 26th. They'll be looking ahead and thinking, this is an earthquake, this is a tsunami for them, because they've used everything possible to shut you up. They've blocked you out in the media. They don't debate with you. The newspapers are not full of what's going on. So they try to keep you out, but at the same time, you get seats, then they'll think, well, how did we didn't manage to stop them, right? And the point is that if you get people in there, then you slowly start the process of giving people hope, because people will then look and go, oh, they're different. They're exposing the corruption. They are exposing what goes on. They are actually arguing an alternative way of doing things. And that's the value of from the bottom up, because it is power of the people. And then people will say, if we can do that in the municipalities, then we can do that in parliament, we can do that in the structures of government, and at the local level. You can't speak about national level. You can't speak about taking on Spain and saying we want independence from Spain if you just deal it on the national structures. You have to look at it, all your structures, right down to the bottom. Every single thing counts, because if you are going to reach out, because this is the key, I think, and it's the key in Scotland, that when we stand at 50-50 in Scotland and people say, 50% of the country doesn't want it. I am one in Scotland that believes that we could have 70% voting for independence in Scotland. We're 50-50 at the moment. But I think that the other 20% have to be convinced. They have to be convinced there's a program against austerity. They have to believe that there's something in it for them. They have to believe that their children's future could be better. And that's why the Primarias, Catalonia, is so important. And so it's an alternative. It's so different to what goes before, because I've seen the manifestos of the others. We don't see anything different. They all sound the same. They all say they're independentist, but I mean, in terms of actually what they say they're going to do, nothing very different. I mean, and what I have seen since I became involved is ordinary people are involved in this organization. They come from all walks of life. They have given up their own time. They're not getting money for it. They're doing it because they believe and because they care. And that is the difference. And people at the top can never understand that. When people come along and say, well, how much money are you getting? You know, what are you doing this for? What's in it for you? And when you turn around and say, because I believe in it. And when you say I believe, then they're in shock, because they go, there must be something. They must have been offered a bribe. You must be getting paid lots of money to do it. So it's a case of when you do that and actually you reach out to the people, you will connect, you will win, it will bring local democracy. And if you get local democracy, then the inevitable result is, whether it's a year, whether it's 2 years, whether it's 5 years, however long it takes, I don't know, I don't have a crystal ball, it will result in that tsunami, in that earthquake, penetrating all structures of government, which then will bring you about independence. And people will once again believe. People are frustrated in this country, and I'll finish off the answer to that as a case of, I was incredibly frustrated last year. When I spoke at the Diada, it was probably in my top 5. If my children were there, they would say, no, we're in the top 3 because they were born, but I'll say in the top 5 events of my lifetime, and I don't know whether it's number 1, number 2, but it was an amazing experience, because when I looked out and I saw the pictures behind me and I saw the screens, and people told me, and I'd asked, I'd asked President Torra, and he says there's about 1 million to 2 million people here, and I was in shock and went, really? And I had written part of my speech in Catalan in the beginning, the middle in English, and the very end. And then I went running to look for Anna. I went, Anna, I need to practice my Catalan. There's 1.5 million people. So it's like, no, say that word again and again and again and again. And then I spoke, and I had tears in my eyes, because right down for 6.7 kilometers, and looking at the screen, you could see so many people. And right from the people that I met, from the moment I walked there, what I recognized was hope. People had hope. People had belief that they could change the world, and that they could start by changing it at home. And the thing that brought tears to my eyes was when twice somebody brought their grandparents to me, who held me, who hugged me, and thanked me. And I asked for the translation, and they said that they had lost family members who were tortured and killed by Franco, and somebody else said that they were tortured or that they suffered, and they said they had waited a lifetime to hear those words, to hear, no pasarán, to hear about Franco, to hear people say this is what you can do, that power rests with the people, you can change the course of history. So for me, very much is a case of what was sad and what was frustrating was that when it came to 4:30 and 5 o'clock, I waited, and I went back, and I always say yes to selfies, but this time after about 2.5 hours, I was very tired, and I thought, what happens now? And I asked the politicians who were there, who weren't speaking, who told me they were not allowed the right to speak. And I asked them, well, what's next? And they went, nothing. Everybody goes home. And I went, goes home? What's the point of bringing 1.5 million people? You've got your political prisoners. They're in prison. The trial will start eventually. Where's the plan? Where's the strategy? No answer. There was no answers. And I had said, Spain has set a trap, and they have walked into that trap. And the frustrating part of it was that you had 1.5 million people, and you did nothing with them. And when I was a child, we had the nursery rhyme of the Grand Old Duke of York. He marched his troops to the top of the hill, and he marched them down again. And when he was up, and when he was down, and then he marched them up to the top of the hill. And each time he went to the top of the hill, the army got less, and it got less, and it got less. And that is the danger with this, that Spain has time on its side. They have had hundreds of years to rule Catalonia. They are no different to Britain, to the British Empire, who raped and pillaged and destroyed the world and took control of countries. And when they could kill people, they would kill them. And when they couldn't kill them, they would bribe them. And when they couldn't bribe them, they would promise things that they would never deliver. And when they never delivered, they would delay. And they would delay. And they would delay, and it would suit them, because it would add on the time of when one day somebody would be free. And the same happens now with Catalonia. And when you have 9 out of 11, There are 9 out of 11 presidents that are jailed, exiled, or executed. You have no option but to change the course of history because Spain is running the same picture. It's the same film. And the politicians in the establishment, they're always so depressed. Oh, there's nothing we can do. Oh, Spain doesn't listen. Oh, Pedro Sanchez. Who cares about Pedro Sanchez? You make the destiny. You change the future. You do it with the local municipalities. Do it with Barcelona. Do it with the towns and the villages. And then you will see actual, real change take place, which will terrify not just Spain, but also the establishment in this country. And they will come running.
Okay. So many things to say, but let me continue something you've said that I think is very important. It has to do with the connection between self-determination and municipalities. Because once you believe in the right to self-determination, this is not only about how you fight Spain at the national level or how you fight whatever country is governing you. But it's also how you rule, how you govern, how you make decisions. That's also self-determination. And I'm going to use 3 examples that we have in our manifesto that I think are very specific, concrete things that have nothing to do with Spain. At the end of the day, they have things to do with Spain because everything has. But they are very specific. One has to do with the eternal debate in this city on whether the electric company or the water supply company should be public or private, right? And the only conversation we're having is whether City Hall should control this company or a private company should control this company. And what we're saying is that the model we like is the model of the electric company in Sacramento. In Sacramento, the electric company is public, but public not in the sense that the City Hall controls it, but in the sense that every resident of Sacramento is a stakeholder of the electric company, so that every 4 years there's an election to the board of the electric company. And the electric company has a mandate to reinvest all revenue into the system or into a cheaper bill for the people who use the electric company. And every 4 years, different candidates promise different strategies for the following years. Either, a very big investment in the infrastructure, or either a cheaper bill for the people, or either a transition into a cleaner way of producing that company. This is applying the principles of self-determination into the managing of a public company. Second, as our audience knows very well, in this city there's a huge debate about the tram, the tramway. You call it the tramway in English? Yeah, tram lines, yeah. Because in this very large street that we have diagonal, right? La Diagonal, we have a tramway, but the middle of the street is not connected. It's 3.8 kilometers. So we have one tram on one end of the street and another tram on the other end of the street, and the discussion is whether we should connect them or not. I know it sounds ridiculous. It is. Okay. This has been in our conversation for 15 years. I'm not joking. I mean, I think we had a referendum in 2007 on whether we should do this or not. It was option A, option B, and none of the above. And none of the above won. Okay. So this is a conflict that we've been having for the longest of times, and every City Hall mandate changes opinions, and it's impossible. Everywhere I go, I want to talk about housing, and then people ask me about the tramway. I want to talk about tourism, and people ask me about the tramway. I want to talk about safety, and people ask. Everybody is talking about this, and everybody has a very strong opinion. So it's not like, I don't know what we should do. No. It's either you do this or I won't vote for you, or the other way around. If you're in favor of this, forget about it. I don't care about anything else. So our proposal is to vote. Our proposal is the first 3 months, if I become mayor and we govern the city, in the first 3 months, we're going to have a referendum. Let's take advantage of the fact that people are interested in having this conversation. Let's have a 3 months conversation on the pros and cons of this. I'm going to be clear, I'm going to defend the yes vote to the connection of the tramway, but I'm willing to accept that this is a major intervention in our urbanism, and this is something that people that has because there are no ideological boundaries. People from the left believe in yes and no, people from the right believe in yes and no, people, there's you cannot say if a party wins the election, that means that people want that. It's impossible to say. So let's have a referendum. Or a third idea that we have. We want to have a congestion tax in Barcelona, like Stockholm has, or Copenhagen, or London, because we have a problem, which is that 850,000 cars every day come into the city and then leave the city. There was a very famous mayor in this town, Pasqual Maragall, the Olympics mayor. And once he was asked how many people live in Barcelona, and he asked at what time of the day, right? It depends on the time of the day. So we want to put a congestion tax in Barcelona, but we know that having a tax to get into the city is polemical. It's a very determined strategy to solve the pollution problem and the toxicity and the congestion. But we know it's polemical. So our proposal is, well, let's put it on, let's make it happen, and then after a year, once we see the results, once we see if we really like it or not, if the city works, if contamination is lower, if congestion is better, then let's have a referendum. And if people want that, we'll keep it. And if people don't want that, then we'll take it away. And then we're going to use the money, of the tax to pay for a better public transportation, which is one of the problems of the metropolitan area of Barcelona. It's a chronic problem because Spain is in charge of trains, so that of course are underfunded and people get late to work and it's very tiring and trains are full and they send us the old trains, they never repair it's crazy, right? Predictable but crazy, which is something that we could use to define Spain, predictable and crazy at the same time. So we're saying let's do it this way. Let's take advantage of the fact that we have policies that are good, original, risky, and then let's ask people if they want to be committed to those policies, and if not, we'll find another way. So this is we believe in this not only because we think it's fair, not only we think it solves problems, because we also believe that once you give that kind of power to the people, it's not only that then politicians cannot betray the will of the people. It's not only that. That's part of it. But there's something else, which is no external power can hijack your politics. Because now the system we have, it's very vertical, right? So that if you have the leader in jail, the entire movement is in jail. If you have the leader in exile, the entire movement is in exile. If you want to, you can pressure a politician, you can find a corruption case and blackmail that politician and then, get things your way. But if every decision, every major decision, even though it can be, and it must be imagined by politicians and political leaders because it's their job, but if the decision is made at the level of the people, then the net is so strong that it doesn't matter who the leader is in some ways. It doesn't matter if you can capture it, pressure it, blackmail it, hijack it, exile, there's no effect against this. So the primaries movement is not only a way of being more democratic, it's also a way of making our political system independent from the pressures of the establishment, of the oligarchs, of the elites, and ultimately of the Spanish state. This is why we're beginning with municipal elections. Because if we're able to connect that new way of approaching problems, which is self-determination, to the smallest of decisions, then we will be able to show that there's no disconnect between the smallest of betterments of our lives and the largest argument of national freedom and the right to govern ourselves.
To finish it up, I would just like to make a note referring to what Aamer was saying earlier. I think that a society is mature when it shows that it has learned the lessons from history. It seems that at the moment Catalonia, well, not Catalonia, but some Catalan politicians in government has not had so much history classes because we look like we are repeating our own history. And that's a shame, because when you were saying about time, and how empires know that they have all the time in their hands. It reminds me of Rovira Virgili, an article that he wrote, I think it was in the 1922 in La Publicidad, a newspaper, Catalan newspaper. Rovira Virgili was a journalist, writer, politician. And he was saying exactly that. Imagine, in the 1920s, Catalans were already saying, when you're a country that occupy other countries, you have all the time in the world. But when you are the occupied nation, it doesn't have any sense that you actually take so much time to shaking up and to grab freedom and to make a move. So absolutely right. And obviously, when you listen speaking Jordi Graupera, what we can say, I think for us, what is really important is to have politicians that they are ready to actually build up upon our own victories and not to build up upon the failings of the state. It's not the failing of the state that we should care about. It's about our own victories. And listening, speaking Jordi Graupera, basically, I have no doubt that the project of primaries and of Barcelona's capital, Primarias Barcelona, is about our own victories. So thank you very much. Five minutes.
5 minuts de descans, 5 minutes rest, and then Aamer and I were going to have a conversation, more personal conversation, because I think many people know Aamer's political opinions, but not his trajectory, and I think it's interesting that we know that. Okay, 5 minutes, and we'll be back.